Government has been criticized for failing to consider wage increases for public servants this financial year. Most unions representing government workers have been fighting for increments for the bigger part of the bargaining period. A 7.5% wage increase was finally agreed upon after long negotiations. Joining us now for a discussion on this is Michael Sachs, who is the Deputy Chairperson at the Finance and Fiscal Commission. Michael, thank you for making time for us. Is it realistic for National Treasury to budget for a 0% salary increase for public servants?
First, Clement, I should clarify, there's a widely held perception that public servants had a 7.5% increase this year, as you said in your intro. That's not actually factually correct. Public servants got an effective 3.3% increase this year. And this comes against the backdrop of 4 years over which they have had below inflation increases. You'll remember in 2020, the year of COVID, we gave nurses, doctors, police officers, teachers 0% increase. The following year, they got about a 4.2% increase in the form of a cash gratuity. In 2022, last year, government unilaterally implemented a 3% increase. And all of these increases have been far below the rate of inflation. So over the last 4 years, the average public servant has seen a 10% real reduction in their pay. So the question is then, or the question that we need to ask is, in the current budget that was tabled in February, the assumption was made that the increase for public servants this year would be 0%. After 3 or 4 years of below inflation increases. Within a month of tabling that budget, the settlement that was reached was 3.3%, again about 3 or 4 percentage points below inflation. But this has generated a huge departure from the expenditure path that was set out in the budget just a month before, and the expenditure path that is now expected. So the challenge that Treasury faces is a real dilemma. On the one hand, we're reducing the real incomes of public servants. On the other hand, we have now a settlement that is way beyond what is budgeted for, leading to a fiscal dilemma. So the question we need to ask is, how do we square these things, both this year and going forward, so that these negotiations do not result in an erosion in the credibility of the budget? Because if you table a budget in February that says one thing, and then within a month's time, you're saying that there's a crisis and we don't have the resources to cover a wage settlement that is far below inflation, that is not really a sustainable direction for us to move along. Yeah.
So when you look at the public servants' real salaries, I mean, they have been falling since, 2020, in the midst of the financial pressures, the high inflation, the interest rates that are going up. This is making unions angry, and one would argue rightly so.
Well, you could say so. I'm not making a moral judgment about it. I'm really just saying that we have a serious dilemma where we've had 4 years of below inflation increases for public servants. And this was supposed to deliver a fiscal consolidation. It was supposed to stabilize the public finances. But after these 4 years of below inflation increases, we seem to be no closer to fiscal consolidation. So going forward, there's going to be a really difficult discussion that has to take place between the state and its employees on how we're going to resolve these problems.
Okay. So, Michael, we always hear government talk about an unsustainable wage. You know, the finance minister always makes a commitment to rein in the wage bill in order to stabilize the finances. So their argument is increasing wages won't necessarily stabilize the finances. Is that a valid argument?
It's a very valid argument. The point I'm making is that Treasury has succeeded in doing exactly that for the last 4 years, but the finances are not yet stabilized. Now, if you push down the salaries of teachers and nurses and police officers year after year, that's going to have consequences on the quality of the personnel you're able to recruit and to deploy into those professions. For a start, the private sector is not imposing the same wage restraint. So private sector wage settlements are generally above inflation and continue to be above inflation. So over time, what you will see is a serious brain drain of public servants. At least the best amongst them will be incentivized to go over to the private sector and seek employment there. About 15 years ago, around 2007, 2008, this brain drain, particularly of nurses and teachers from the public sector, was noticed, and it was decided to substantially raise the pay of public servants in order to retain and attract the best people in the public service. That probably overshot, but something called the occupation-specific dispensation led to a significant improvement in public sector salaries, and so brought that brain drain to an end. Effectively, what we've done over the last 4 years is reverse the implementation of those decisions. So we're now in a situation where public pay has been significantly reduced.
Yeah.
And you might say that's okay for now. The point is that we can't continue to reduce public pay forever into the future. And as I mentioned, we still don't really see the fiscal consolidation that the reduction in public pay was supposed to achieve. So government needs to make some very difficult choices about how it designs its fiscal framework, how it designs its programs, so that we can balance the need for effective public education, effective public healthcare, effective policing on the one hand, with the need for fiscal stabilization on the other.
Yeah. So how does government balance its belt tightening without punishing these essential public sector workers? How do they bridge that gap?
Well, first of all, you have to make effective policy decisions. The problem here doesn't really lie with Treasury. It lies with the broader government policy-making process. So let me give you an example. The budget that is given to defense is far, far below what the defense force needs to operate with. And indeed, it's been overspending on its compensation budget because the resources it has are not enough to pay for the soldiers it has. The way you resolve that problem is to change policy to create a defense force that is kind of designed that is tailored to the cloth we have to dress it with. So if that means, for instance, taking a decision to reduce the size of the defense force significantly, that should be considered. But it seems that government wants to proceed and continue to have a defense force of the current size. And so there's an incompatibility between the program of the Ministry of Defense and the program of Treasury. And that needs to be resolved. And that's just one example. It's a problem that is affecting government across the board. We still continue to want to deliver many policy programs to many people. And we don't seem to want to prioritize and say what it is that is most important. And when you do that, you have to say what it is that we can dispense with. So something has to give. When something gives, that's a political choice that will have social and political consequences. But that's why we elect a president and politicians to make those types of decisions. And the longer they postpone them and they fail to make those decisions, the more you will see these kinds of intractable trade-offs between, on the one hand, a fiscal trajectory which is unsustainable, but on the other hand, a path of public sector wages that is also unsustainably low.
So these trade-offs then, isn't it that they will now become even more acute as the country's economy deteriorates? Absolutely.
The fiscal policy and the budget is really not the cause of the problem here, and is not. It doesn't contain the solution to the problem. The problem is two. First, it's that our national income has been stagnating for a decade and continues to stagnate, and looks like it's going to stagnate further and decline. So our per capita income, the average income of a South African, is falling. That's the one problem. The second problem is that in those conditions, government is unable or unwilling to make key policy trade-offs and make the difficult decisions that it needs to make. That's the second problem. We would need to resolve both of those problems in order to stabilize the public finances. And until we have some growth and until we have some policy direction, it's highly unlikely that the public finances can be stabilized.
Michael, thank you for making time. Michael Sachs, Deputy Chairperson at the Finance and Fiscal Commission.